everyone. Welcome to the Dr. Sonja Sutherland Show. As you know, when we meet, we talk about family wellness and emotional health and emotional wellness. And we believe that the family is, of course, the primary place of belonging for all individuals. And so our goal, of course, is to make sure that you have the tools that you need to help you be as solid as you can in your own personal and emotional mental wellness and in your family wellness. And so today we're talking about veterans, and for veteran families from a health perspective and from a family relationship perspective, there can be quite the significant struggle to feel as though they belong as they try to reintegrate into society and the family and rejoin in general. And the struggle can be pretty significant. And so today we have two guests with us, and we'll talk about this and other topics that will arise around veterans. We have Jeremy Fortune, who is an Army veteran, and Conrad Valsey, who's a licensed professional counselor. And am I right to think that you've told me in the past, Conrad, that you're an Army vet as well?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. So welcome to both of you. Appreciate you coming to the show. So Jeremy, why is this an important thing for us to talk about today?
Well, it's important because we got a lot of vets, brothers and sisters that are coming home, and the mental shift that happens when you're in a quote unquote danger zone, combat zone, and then all of a sudden you're airlifted back home and your environment is completely different. And the toll that it takes on people, especially seeing things, done things, being close to things that are not pleasant, then you're told that you got to come back home and re-assimilate just like that to society and how society does things. And a lot of people, if they're not prepared for that, it can be a huge struggle. So,
even as you say that, it strikes me that there is probably just a lack of awareness around what that transition is like. You talk about being airlifted from a combat zone back home. If you had to paint a picture for someone who really just has no idea, a civilian who's never been in combat, only knows what they see in the news and can say the words, what would you say to them to help them really get it? What is that like for a veteran?
Well, you're in an area where you have a license to take a life if need be. You're constantly ever vigilant, looking around, scanning. There's there's a whole nother set of awareness. And if you make it back to if you make it back that evening, you did a good job, and all your brothers made it back, you did a good job. And then the next day you're reassigned back to, home. And you're expected to deal with that guy that just flipped you off, cutting you off on the freeway. And you're supposed to turn that off when, 2 days ago, depending on the circumstances, the situation could have been different. And you're around people that have no clue what it's like to be in situations like that.
Yeah.
And they don't understand, you don't understand. I mean, it's just, there's a lot that goes into it. And that's why a lot of these brothers and sisters that are coming back have struggled with this. 22 vets kill themselves every day. And, that's so.
Yeah. And we don't hear about the 22. So Conrad, as you're listening and thinking about your journey back, and just the work that you do with veterans every day as well, tell us some more information that helps put this in perspective for people.
Okay, so let me just add to what Jeremy said. Let's go back, maybe, I don't know how long Jeremy was enlisted before he was deployed. So let's go back. I'll talk about my situation where I was a young, stupid kid. I don't want to talk about Jeremy because I don't know you like that.
I was.
But okay, so we were both young, stupid kids, and we had to go through bare minimum, 8 weeks, bare minimum worth of training to strip away this young, stupid, innocent kid away from us. And then more than likely, some sort of additional training, which is AIT, Advanced Individual Training, right? So at the bare minimum, we're talking about 3-4 months worth of training to get us prepared for a combat situation. Then let's fast forward to where Jeremy is now deployed, and Jeremy is in a combat zone, and he's exposed daily to life-threatening situations on a daily basis. And you know what, let's say second by second, because in the combat zone, you never know when it's coming. So you have to be, as he mentioned, hyper-aware, hyper-vigilant. Then the very next moment he's being airlifted, he barely gets a high five, and they say, all right, thank you. Thanks for doing what you did. Now you go back home. Again, 3 months worth of training to prepare, as opposed to a day or two to get back into what we refer as civilian life.
Mm.
So if you can only imagine the shock and all, it's as if right now we're in Georgia and it's 70, 80 degrees. Can you imagine if the temperature dropped 40 degrees by tomorrow? It would be a shock to all of us.
Mm-hmm.
So now imagine this happening to Jeremy in 2-3 days.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
No additional support, no preparation, no training to go back home to a group of people that, again, remember, he's hyper aware, he's hyper vigilant, because he just came from that combat zone. That's what veterans face. Now, I would be remiss if I said that every veteran, is dealing with PTSD. But if you've been exposed to combat, more than likely you are experiencing some sort of traumatic or response to that trauma.
Yeah, and so I would say, even let's just go back, because the minute you start to say strip away the stupid kid, to me, that feels traumatic to me. That that being stripped away from you is what you know and what you understand of the world, to teach you something different that's coming that you really don't know till it hits you when you get there. But what does that mean, stripping away the stupid kid? What and how does that contribute to trauma? I mean, would you say, Jeremy, that your boot camp experience was a stripping away for you?
Oh yeah, yeah. It's just you gotta. They basically break you down and then build you back up into what they want you to be like. You know what I mean? So
and what do they want you to be like?
I mean, if you're going to be a soldier, you're going to be a killer. You're going to be trained for combat. You're going to be trained to defend the nation. That's what your job is. So, they're going to take you, they're going to tear away everything that was important to you, everything that you are, and they're going to build you back up to something that they want you to be. That's just the nature of it. That's boot camp all the way around. So
I would say kind of think of it like, because I'm also an Army veteran, I would say think of it like a 3 to 4 year old child who has been taken out of his home and turned into an adult overnight. Can you imagine how overwhelming, how stressful it is to go from this innocent child to an adult with no supportive family, no one you know, and you're basically all on your own and alone. But you have to learn and be with new individuals, and that's now your new family. It's just to even sit here and think about it, it's a little heart-wrenching when I look back on what I went through to go into the military. And it wasn't easy. It was very stressful, and you had the world on your shoulders. this child with the world on their shoulders,
Literally.
literally.
So,
If I'm sorry, Doc, let me just chime in quickly. So part of that process is a couple of different folds. The first one is the breaking down of the individual, where they're stripping away is your individuality and
Right.
putting you into a one unit mode. So this is why there's such camaraderie with military personnel. Only I and Jeremy and Juan can joke about someone from the Navy and the Air Force. I better not hear anybody else who's never served say something about these guys. But there's, a Marine, we can joke all day because we take an oath, and that oath literally says we're willing to give our life. That's what the oath says. So it takes the individuality away, it's stripped away, and you become, it takes away the autonomy of an individual and says you now become part of a team, which is a great idea.
And you no longer belong to yourself. You belong to the United States government.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
An individual identity. You belong to the United States government. You are now a number. You're not a person. You are what we want you to be.
I'm just sitting here as a mother thinking, why would I want to send my son to do this? And I understand the larger picture. I completely do. But just from a mother standpoint, I'm just thinking, wow, I sent my son to do this. I don't have a son, but if I, this is what.
So Dr. S, let me just say this, because Jeremy said it a couple of times, not just your son, your daughter as well.
Your daughter as well.
Your daughter would go through the same training.
Right.
There's a lot of female veterans that have put their life on the line the exact same way we have. Mm-hmm. So it would be unfair not to.
Absolutely.
Because females, they endure the exact same thing. So again, we do it as an idea. To me, it was just something that I wanted to do. I joined peacetime. I joined because I wanted to pay for school. And I thought it would be a great experience for me. It was just that towards the latter part of me being enlisted and going into the National Guard, that there's a storm happened. This was towards the end for me. However, one of the things that I share a lot with the current veterans, my group of guys that I work with, is I tell them today is May 29th, 2019. And today there's a young kid who's being deployed today, literally, that has no idea that 2 years from now, when he comes back, he or she comes back, they're gonna be dealing with what Jeremy and Juan and we're all talking about. They have no idea. And that's sort of, I appreciate you placing focus on this, but that's who this is for. It's not, the guys that are here, thank God they're here. We can hopefully wrap, the services around them and help provide support for them. But there's a couple of young kids today, they have no idea what's coming. And we have to prepare for them.
Yeah. So it's interesting that you say we have to prepare for them, not that you have to prepare them.
Well, yeah, because it would, I believe, and I'm not an expert in that section, but I believe if you were to prepare them for the inevitable, it may actually trigger. I don't know if that makes any sense, because in a combat zone, those skills that you learn in boot camp and AIT and in training is there specifically to help keep you alive.
Yeah, I don't, you really can't prepare them for the things that they may or may not see. You don't know how things are going to affect different individuals. 24 years ago, I deployed to Bosnia in 1995, and I remember crossing the river and seeing this entire city like Swiss cheese, right, just leveled. And that didn't bother me. But what bothered me was seeing kids running up to our Humvees begging for food. Some of them didn't have limbs and those types of things. Like the notion of children being injured because of things that men have started, that affected me. Soldiers, you can list, soldiers die. That's part of the game. We all know that going in. That's just part of it. And I'm okay with that. I'm not okay with children being affected. You know what I mean? So again, you can't make a scenario like that and train people to deal with that ahead of time. You have no idea. And again, things affect differently. People feel differently. So, you know, you can only do so much. That's where coming home and gentlemen like Conrad, having, you know, being there for them, walking them through the process of healing, so huge. Doesn't get enough. Guys like him don't get enough credit for what he does. You don't get enough credit for bringing awareness to this. You don't hear about these types of things. You know, you don't see the struggles that these young men and women have when they come home. Just the day-to-day function. You know, going into a restaurant and sitting down while you see everybody eating. When you're thinking to yourself, my brothers and sisters are across the way, they may not be eating right now. They may be hunkered down somewhere. And here we are sitting around here. You know, these are things that I struggle with. Just the guilt, you know, the guilt of seeing people over there. And it's crazy because you would think from your vantage point that we would never, no human, no right-minded person would ever want to be in a situation like that. But when you've been in a situation like that and you've shared these things with your brothers and your sisters, and then you come back and you know that they're still gone, there's a part of you that wishes you were there to be a part of that. And only these gentlemen here would understand what I'm saying, you know?
Yeah. And so when you point to something as simple as sitting in a restaurant, which people just take for granted, it's just a normal, you know, every day, and not knowing that the person sitting at the table across from you could be a vet and has a completely different mindset that you just won't even understand, and the struggle that goes along with that. You know, when you started this last thing that you talked about, Jeremy, with a little bit about your experience and what really bothered, one thing that really bothered you as you deployed and ended up in combat areas. And it just kind of alluded to, and I think probably alluded to just the bare minimum of what you saw and what you experienced that was traumatic, and that was more than you could have ever prepared for. And that probably impacts you and other vets like you till today, however many years later after you have returned. And so when we talk about the idea of trauma and layers of trauma, because Conrad, you started, and Jeremy, you started talking just about that whole stripping away process, being taught to become a killer. That was your layer one trauma. And then you go into combat zones. And then you talk about what you just talked about, Jeremy, and that's another layer of trauma that just builds on and builds on. And then as you talk about coming back and dealing with reintegrating, to me, that just feels like a third level of trauma. And so far, nobody's talking about having dealt with the other traumas even before coming back home to reintegrate, right? And so all of that just kind of speaks to how difficult it must be, and what's involved in that word difficult, which then becomes a complete understatement when you think about it.
Well, you're taught not to fear. You don't show emotion. Yeah. You're not supposed to show emotion. You're not supposed to be fearful of anything. You know, you're supposed to stuff all that because you got a job to do. You got a mission to accomplish. stuff it, don't talk about it. Make sure your brothers come back safely home.
Mm-hmm.
Watch your back, they watch yours. You know, that's what you do. So you're really there may be more outlets now. I mean, I've been out of the Army for quite some time, but when I was in, you didn't talk about your emotions. And Conrad, I'm guessing that was probably the same for you guys. Juan, same with you guys when you were in. You didn't share any of that stuff.
Right. You have this big body of protection, this body of armor that had no flaws, had no way of penetrating your inner soul or spirit. You had to be this shell of protection. That's how it was for me. You could not show any fear among your colleagues, and you just had to step forward at any given point and realize that you could be that next leader of that squad or that next leader of that platoon. You know, because you just lost your buddy who was your leader.
Mm-hmm. I know of there's one particular client that I've worked with who just shared with me a couple of weeks ago that, again, and I don't want this to come across as if we're bashing the military. It's just a culture of things, which is what is resulting into some of this veteran PTSD phenomenon that we're seeing, the 22 that Jeremy talked about that we're losing per day. What he talked about was around the table for consideration for promotion, NCOs, non-commissioned officers, if it came up that you were in some sort of a mental health hospital, then pretty much that just sealed your fate. Your file would be placed on the side and then we'll move on to the next one. If, you know, Jeremy just talked about seeing the children. If he went and talked to anyone about this and displayed that emotion and he was up for a promotion, then he would not even be considered.
So I really would love to talk more about that. So we'll be right back after the break. Welcome back to the Dr. Sonja Sutherland Show, everyone. When we left the last segment, you know, Jeremy was talking with us just about that idea of having to shut down emotion as you train in the military and in order to survive when you're in combat. You wanted to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, and one of the stories I just talked about was promotions. So you still enlisted and you're up for promotion to the next rank. And if for some reason you decide that an image or an idea or thought is just way too difficult to process or deal with, and an emotion is creeping in, and remember, like Jeremy said, emotions are no. Actually, the one emotion you're allowed to display is happiness. That's it. Everything else needs to be shoved down into a box. And if you display it and you feel like talking about it and you want to process through it, then you go and you talk to a professional. That is on your military record. And that in itself would be grounds for not even being considered for disqualification, for unofficially. Of course, this would never be, you know, I'm pretty sure right now someone's listening to this and they'll say, oh no, officially that's not the policy. I agree. Unofficially, your name would be dismissed from the consideration of being promoted. So it's sort of like a contradiction. If you're experiencing emotions, which is human, then you don't belong in this group of superhumans.
Hmm.
Well, you also look at it like this. So if we're downrange and we have to go out on some sort of patrol or whatever it may be, and you get wind that somebody in your squad or on your team may have some sort of issue, you're not going to want that person to go out with you because you're not sure that person's going to take 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 care of their business if something goes down. You're not sure if they're going to have your six. You know what I'm saying? So, and you don't even know what the person may be talking about. So that's another thing. You know, you have to have people around you that are geared, ready to go, and again, stuff your emotions down. And you don't want people talking about their feelings because that's going to put a doubt in their head. Is this person capable of taking care of their business if something goes south? So.
You basically taught in the military. Let's say you went to the doctor and you were having issues, and you kind of started talking about these emotions. That military doctor would more or less tell you, if you want to continue doing what you're doing, if you want to continue with your group, this is what you need to do. You can't express the issues that you're having because of just what Conrad said. You would not be even thought of in that group of being selected to be promoted. So not only was it would you have been blackballed within the unit, but the culture was to get you back on the field as quickly as possible without you having to deal with that emotional distress that you're under.
And so it has utility, life-saving utility in the field.
Right.
And then when you return, however, it's a completely different outcome. The shutting down of emotion and the, what is the right word, inability to, is that the right word to use when we're talking about vets who now have returned and are reintegrating, that there is an inability to then, or willingness to reaccess that emotion and bring that back as part of their daily life in order to function well in society, in relationship with other people? Is that the right word to use, or is it something different?
I don't know the answer to that. Because, just because we're not in a combat zone, that doesn't mean make the world a safer place. Now, again, compared to, as Jeremy said, being out in the country and being deployed to a combat zone, our lives are 100%, or at least 90, 75%, less harmful or threatening to us. But it still doesn't make it, non-threatening. It still doesn't mean that we don't need to be aware. Every broken clock is right at least twice a day. So it's sort of, how do you balance it out? That's what a lot of vets struggle with is, well, the number one thing that, as you were talking, I was thinking about is the number one thing that 95%, if not all, the vets that I've worked with say they struggle with is trust, because of the process that we go through. When I'm in a unit, when I'm the new guy, I have to earn the trust of everyone else in my unit by doing my job. And if I can't perform, then they can't trust me. Like Jeremy said, they don't know whether or not I'm going to have their six. So they may not necessarily have my six. So I've earned that trust. And once I'm in the fold, I'm in the fold. I'm there for life. Then maybe John or Jane or someone else is rotated out of that group. Next person that comes in has to earn that trust as well, because we know what our job and position are. We know what our duties are within that unit. So it's sort of like it's a continuous trust process. And then once we rotate back out of the military and we're out in the world, it's really difficult for others, for civilians to come into our circle because they have to earn that trust as well. Like, what's your role in my life? What are you bringing into the table? And why should I trust that you're going to have my six? That's probably the number one thing that I see most of the clients struggle with. This is where sometimes PTSD is really difficult. I've been told by some of my clients that they respond to me better because I am a veteran and I'm familiar with the language and with the customs of the military. That helps them assimilate better. I don't like to believe so because, you know, healing doesn't mean that the injury didn't occur. Healing means it no longer controls you.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Mm-hmm. What was your process, Juan, of reintegrating? How did emotion come back for you? Is it still a struggle? Did it come back? How did that impact the family?
Wow, that's interesting that you asked me that, because I still to this day have an issue with trust. I still to this day have an issue with expressing my emotions. It wasn't until I went to Richmond that I was able to start opening up and expressing myself emotionally.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't realize how much I stuffed all of that for all those years. And you could see it, or I could see it, you know, when I started opening up, how it affected my family. And so, like I say, to this day, I still struggle with the issue of trust. I still struggle with the issue of expressing my emotions. And it's funny how I did not realize it until a few years ago that I had that issue and that problem.
And how long had you been out of the military before you started at Richmond?
Wow. I got out of the military in 91, but I did off and on reserve in Army National Guard. But I still, you know, it's been that long that I was out of active duty.
Yeah. So that was 20 plus years.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. How about for you, Jeremy?
Well, I've been out for 18 years. I got out in 2000, and since then I've been divorced twice and married again. I'm not going to say that my experiences were the reasons I got divorced, but my life dictates a continuing theme of not being able to deal with things, not trusting, and not being trustworthy, to be honest with you. So when you stuff and you don't deal with things and you kind of just, you know, you go along with what you were taught, just to, you don't talk about that stuff, you just handle it, you just deal with it, be a man, be a soldier about it. It can lead to some difficult times in your civilian life, and they still reside today. To be honest, they do. So.
Yeah. And so, you know, even as I hear your stories, it strikes me that when you came back, obviously you weren't the same person that left. And so not only did you have to relearn somehow how to navigate what you knew before, but because you were different, how to navigate it now. But also, I imagine there was a process of your family relearning you to a degree, your parents, your siblings, your spouses, if you were married at that time, trying to figure out who is the new person that has come back. What was that process like, just in terms of the conversations about that? Were there conversations, and what helped what helped, because some of the people listening will, even if they haven't been in the military, they may have family members who've been in the military. And a big question is going to be, well, what do I do, right? How do I help? How do I reconnect with my loved one? How do we talk about that? What do we need to talk about in that conversation?
Wow. Like I said, for me, I didn't realize that I had an issue until I actually started working on my degree in marriage and family therapy. And within those classes, I learned that I needed therapy. I learned that I needed to actually get the help that I needed to open up. It never dawned on me that I needed therapy, just because as a culture, we don't understand or even feel that therapy is something that we need. It's, you deal with your own problems, and that's another process and part of the military. You deal with your own problems. What made it so difficult for me is that, once I got out of the military, I still felt that void of being out of that uniform. So what did I do? I went and got in another uniform. I built that same lifestyle around law enforcement. So I never really got out of that mentality and that mode of being able to trust and always making sure that I had someone or individuals around me that I knew, as far as in law enforcement, that would have my back or have my six. And so it's been a struggle. It's still a struggle to be able to open up and to trust people. My circle of friends is so small, I can probably count on one hand the number of people that are in my circle, friend-wise, and still have fingers left over for space for people to join. So that's how difficult it is with the transition. It takes some time to be able to build that trust, for others.
Yeah. So then you replaced the military with your new work as a police officer, and that was how you dealt with. Yeah.
That's how I got through it.
Yeah. Conrad, how did you get through?
Well, first thing I did is I literally disconnected from the military. It took 15 years. I got out in 95. I joined in 87, 88. So once I finished my last part of my contract with the National Guard back in 95, I was inactive and I just let go completely. And to be honest with you, I have not used the term veteran, not until recently when I started working with veterans. It's not something I talked about unless someone brought it up. I disconnected completely. And as we were talking about, when you said that that process of integrating into the military, and families, my family, for me, again, I've been really fortunate. And I have to tell you, I was not exposed to combat. I have not been in that issue. So most of my family members didn't have to deal with that, but a lot of my buddies were. So what I see is the grieving process. I have a lot of my buddies and a lot of the vets I work with, their families are grieving the loss of the young innocent kid that left. I never really also processed that grief. I never processed the fact that I changed, which is the reason why the term veteran was created. Sort of like, in NA, they talk about the difference between a cucumber and a pickle. if you're a cucumber, you can stay a cucumber, you can become a pickle. But once you become a pickle, that's it. Once you join and you go through the process and you're successful and you complete it and you become a veteran, it's really difficult to go from civilian military personnel and back to civilian, which is why that term veteran was created for us, because it's a different process for a human being to go through. And I don't know whether or not, like Juan said and Jeremy said, I ever really thought to myself, like, wow, this was really impactful in my life and I needed to process through it. Let me take a look at how it impacted my life and how it impacts my life today. I never really thought of it until I started processing with others, especially veterans. And I'm like, so I probably went through the same thing. I just never processed through it. So it's a work in progress. And I think for the three of us up here talking, I think it's a work in progress. It's a human condition, basically.
You talked a little bit about families grieving the loss of the individual that left and went to the military. And so we started initially, my initial question had to do with what helped when you came back, and what do families need to know that would be helpful. And so part of what you're saying is that one thing is that they do need to understand that what they're experiencing as family members is grief, and that they actually need to go through that grieving process of, this is who I had, this was the person before they left, and here's who they are now. It's not just that I have to deal with it, but I do also have a right to grieve who I lost. Do veterans grieve who they lost, who they were?
I enjoy, really, for lack of a better word, because everything I've said that's negative, I feel like my military experience is kind of like my family experience. I love everything about my family. However, there are a couple of crazy people in my family I don't want to connect with. So it's sort of like that. There are a couple of things that I don't necessarily agree with, but it is still, I got to look at the entire scope, the entire picture. Juan is talking and I can relate to what Juan is saying. Jeremy is talking, I can relate to what he's saying, because I've experienced all that. It's kind of like going to a different country, or experiencing food, going to a restaurant and someone saying, yeah, I went there and I had this. I can relate to it. Even though maybe when I went into this restaurant, I saw the plate was dirty, but it doesn't mean that I completely disavow every part of that experience. I enjoy the experience. So I know it may be difficult. Someone may be listening to this and they might be saying, these guys, no, I'm not bashing. This was my experience. Take it or leave it. And I take it.
Yeah. When we come back from the break, I want to talk a little bit further just around what families can do that would help with a military veteran coming back and looking to figure out, how do I reintegrate? How do I do this? How do I become this next person that's now here when I come back to society? We'll be back right after the break.
Do you want peace in your family relationships instead of conflict? Do you want a safe, loving marriage instead of one that is failing? Are you troubled about what's happening with your children and need help for them? At Legacy Changers Counseling Centers, the goal is to strengthen individuals and families with cutting-edge emotional and mental health interventions. The exceptionally trained counselors at Legacy provide the specialized guidance you need in a safe environment of belonging so that you can make the life changes you and your loved ones need. Get real help for your emotional and relationship needs. Call today at 404-334-7575. That's 404-334-7575. You can also find us on the web at legacychangerscounseling.com. Call now and transform your life today. 404-334-7575 or LegacyChangersCounseling.com.
Welcome back to the Dr. Sonja Sutherland Show. I'm here with Jeremy Fortune, Conrad Valsey, and Juan Edgar, who are military vets, and we're just talking through the experience of reintegrating, what their experiences were. And as we ended the last segment and wanting to move into the second, started talking about family and how families can, one, understand the experience of their vets, grieve to some extent the loss of the person that they knew before that individual went into the military. But we also wanted to talk about what types of things could be helpful for families to do or not do when military vets are coming back. That will be helpful for them to, as they seek to reintegrate. So Jeremy, I guess I want to start with you and ask you, as you came back, at any point, did you grieve the loss of your former self? And then what in your family life experiences was helpful for you in helping you reintegrate?
Grieving was never a part of anything that I did. I never looked at it like that. As far as family life, I can tell you what not to do. You have to remember that the folks that are coming back from deployments nowadays a lot of them have engaged in sustained combat, which is different than sporadic type of deals,
Okay.
Just because you're deployed, I want to make sure that everybody understands this. Just because you're deployed to a combat zone doesn't necessarily mean you've been in combat. There's a difference. And Juan and Conrad will know what I'm saying. Most of the people that are deployed are not kicking indoors dealing with sustained combat. They're in bad areas. There's always the risk. But the folks that have really engaged in sustained combat, those are the ones that tend to have the biggest struggles when they come back, because it's one thing to be in a bad area. It's another thing to be in a bad area and have done and seen things and have lost people. These folks, we've lost 5,000 soldiers here since 2001. That's 5,000 people, brothers and sisters we have lost, which is a huge deal. It just, you really can't fathom that. And a lot of these people that are back have seen their brothers and sisters pass, and we really can't grasp that, because there is a brotherhood. There's a brotherhood, and when I say brotherhood, I mean men and women together. We just call it a brotherhood. That bonds when you are in a bad area where you've got people that watch your back and you watch theirs, and there's just something that cannot be explained. The civilian world, there's no way the civilian world cannot understand this. There's just something that happens, and when you lose somebody, the emotional toll that it takes on that soldier, these are young folks too, to when they come back to give them an agenda and to tell them to get over it and to, why don't you just get over it? I've heard that so many times. You can't do that as a family member. Not saying to coddle it and to let it be okay, because it's not. Eventually we're going to have to there's a process that has to go through. You don't want to enable that, but at the same time, don't ever try to put yourself and say that you understand where that's happened unless you've actually been there for that. The other thing is, I used to want to be around other veterans that saw stuff, and I found that early in my therapy, we'll call it, that being around a lot of other veterans that weren't interested in getting healed, they just wanted to kind of wallow in the stuff and bring everybody down, and it became their identity. And you don't ever want that to become your identity, because if that becomes your identity, healing is going to be a very difficult task. And the thing is, we don't ever want you to forget, but because you can't, but at the same time, you've got to be able to move on and to function, or you're going to have a difficult time. And I'm speaking this from experience. Again, since I've been out of the military, I've been married 3 times. It's not an accident.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I would implore that when people come back from combat, that they don't stuff, that they surround themselves with people that want to build them up. And I'm not going to go without saying this. The biggest thing in my life that has gotten me to a different level than I once was is God. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Finding God at 37 years old, although I'm not perfect, has been a huge, huge factor in my life. That's the best that I can say. Patience, not enabling, being there. Don't ever try to act like you understand what they're going through. And not letting them wallow in it. That's the best way that I can say.
Yeah, yeah, that's good. Juan, how about you?
You know, I can't but agree 100% with Jeremy. I never did grieve the loss of myself. It just was never there for me. As far as things that families can do, again, I have to agree with Jeremy. You can't, one, you don't want to enable, but then two, you don't want to come up with the old cliche, I understand, or say, like Jeremy saying, get over it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's going to take a lot of patience with that family of that soldier in order to help that soldier, you know, walk through their new life, so to speak. The only thing that I would add is that both family and soldier have to get into therapy. That in itself would do a tremendous amount of good with respects to having the family understand where that soldier's coming from, and also helping that soldier get to where they need to be in order that they can function, you know, in the civilian world. Stuffing is like smothering yourself. It's like being on the water, trying to gasp for that air, and all you're taking in is water. You can't breathe water. So again, I just can't help but piggyback off of Jeremy and say that that family's going to have to be patient with that soldier, and you can't force that soldier to get over what they've been through in a matter of days or weeks. It's going to take time. And time is the biggest thing. Is time is going to heal within the family and that soldier.
Okay. All right. Conrad, how about you? What would be helpful for families to know? What have you seen?
Well, it's not the answer. It's some things that may have helped. The two things I tell them, one, I'll piggyback again, like one to Jeremy. First thing is I tell them it's not necessarily the answer, but the first thing that the family member can do is to acknowledge. It doesn't mean you need to say it over and over, but acknowledge it. You don't understand, but you have to be able to, difference between an apology saying, oh, I apologize, or, you know what, I'm sorry, I didn't realize I stepped on your foot, I wasn't paying attention. You know, just acknowledge that someone has gone through something and allow them to go through the process. Mm-hmm. And two, be okay with being okay, and be okay with the person not being okay as well, because there are ebbs and flows with the process of recovery. It's a long-term process. Yeah. I ran into a graduate from my program a couple of weeks ago, and this particular individual has sustained some wounds, and I saw him walking, and I realized that he didn't look well at all. So I pulled over just to say hi to him, and he said, "I'm not doing well." But a lot of times I put a good face for people.
Mm-hmm.
I put this fake smile on, but I'm not doing well. And I had to acknowledge for him. I said, "I appreciate you being honest with me." I said, "Today's one of those days. You're not okay, right?" He said, "Yeah, I'm not okay." I said, "Okay, I'm okay with that. I just want to acknowledge you that you're going through a tough day. We all have tough days." He goes, "You know what? I really appreciate that." And I had to back off because he was going through a tough time. I've heard it said, if someone is going through something, let them go through it, because for most of his um, process, he was not going through it. He was trying to avoid it, go under it, drink, use, engage in risky behavior, just not addressing it at all. And today he was going through it, and it was difficult for him. And I acknowledged it was a difficult day, and I backed off. He needed some space.
Yeah.
And if someone needs space, just back off. It's, the grieving process, I use two words when I talk about grieving. I say intensity and frequency. When you incur some trauma or some issues, the intensity of the pain is always the same, no matter how long it goes. What changes is the frequency, is how often you experience that pain and where it debilitates you from being able to function. So just give someone some space. If today they're going through 5 minutes or an hour of pain, leave them alone. Just acknowledge them, ask if they need any support. And if they say, "No, I'm just going through something," back off. Again, that's not the answer. It's just one of the things I've seen as help.
Mm-hmm.
Just to acknowledge someone and what they're going through.
Sure. Yeah. And I appreciate the combination of things that you all are talking about. As we frame them, these are some things that can help. And no one of those things by themselves can be effective, but many of the things that you're talking about that families can do and not do altogether can be really helpful. So I can imagine, as you say to a family member, if someone's not okay today, acknowledge it, be okay with it, not being okay that day. And then I see that as well, layered onto Juan's admonition about therapy. It's okay not to be okay. It will happen that you're not going to be okay sometimes. And the thing that you're doing about it, and the thing that the family is supporting, is being in a process of getting help, so that over time, the frequency of not being okay or the intensity of not being okay may decrease. It may take a long time, but it reminds me of what you all talked about, just in terms of doing it yourself. I can handle it myself, right? Versus the perspective of getting the help to handle the things that are going on. And so I appreciate the admonitions that all three of you are giving. And I appreciate not just the sacrifices that you made in your service to this country. I appreciate the fact that you're willing to come and talk and to just share a little bit so that people understand a little bit differently from this perspective. So thank you for taking time to be a part of the show, and thank you for everything that you have done for the United States and everything that you're doing for the people that you're touching now in the lives that you're leading now, because it sounds like all of you are doing something in that realm. So thank you, I appreciate it.
Experiencing a crisis, please reach out to the VA Crisis Hotline. That number, again, in case you don't have it, it's 1-800-273-8255. That's always the first course of action. Jeremy mentioned it earlier, we lose 22. That's just been identified.
That's been
22 veterans per day. So if you're experiencing a crisis, call the VA Crisis Hotline. Someone will be there who will walk you through the process.
And we'll post it on the website as well, where this show is posted. So folks, you can go to www.helpformyfamily.com and look for this show, and those resources and some additional ones will be there as well. All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us for the Dr. Sonja Sutherland Show. If you know a veteran in your life, or if you're a veteran yourself, we hope that the information here has been really helpful for you, and that it inspires you and gives you some hope.